I opened the door to find my wife of 27 years standing there, shoulder to shoulder with a man I had never seen before. A man whose handshake probably left bruises and whose cologne entered the room 5 seconds before he did. She didn't knock. She just walked in like it was still her house, even though her soul had clearly packed its bags months ago. The man with her? Tall, gym-bodied, straight teeth, designer jacket. The type of guy who adjusts his cufflinks before ruining lives. She smiled like a job candidate, rehearsed and overly polished. "John," she said, as if we were strangers. "We need to talk." And I knew. Not because she said it, not because of her tone, but because her eyes darted around the living room like it was a real estate showing. He trailed in behind her, bold enough to leave wet footprints on my hardwood, even though it wasn't raining. "I want a divorce," she said, standing beneath the wedding photo we'd framed in oak and spent a Saturday hanging together. "This marriage, it hasn't been working. We've grown apart." She had the audacity to sound compassionate. The guy smirked, hands in his pockets, scanning the room like a buyer. His gaze lingered on the antique record cabinet my father left me. I could almost hear him mentally rearranging the space, like the house was already his. I didn't respond, didn't flinch, just stared at them. Then I turned, walked down the hallway with the calm of a man going to fetch his glasses, into my study, the one she always called the museum, because apparently books and maps and silence offended her after she met a guy who ran on protein shakes and podcasts. I unlocked the drawer I hadn't opened in months, took out the envelope, sealed white unassuming, and walked back in. No speech, no theatrics. I handed it to her. Her boss raised an eyebrow, still grinning. She took it slowly, confused but too arrogant to worry. "You ever hand someone something that makes their face fold in on itself?" That's what I watched happen next. She opened it like it was going to be a poem or a guilt-drenched apology. But it wasn't. It was truth, cold and contractual. She looked up after a few seconds, bloodless. The guy stepped closer to peek inside. He laughed, short and nervous. That's when I took one step forward. "You see, some men yell. Some beg. I don't. I waited for this moment. And that envelope? That wasn't me surrendering. That was just the first move. By the way, if you're still listening and you're one of the 97% who haven't subscribed, do it now. Keeps this team going, and what's coming next? You're gonna want to hear it. Because betrayal doesn't scream. It sharpens the knife. And waits." She tore it open like she expected a confession. Or maybe a handwritten plea. Theatrical, overacted, like she was on some reality show and this was her grand finale. Even tilted her chin. Gave that smug little squint she used whenever she thought she had the upper hand. The smirk didn't last 4 seconds. Her fingers froze mid-flip. First page. Notarized financial documents. Second. Screenshots, printed in color, of messages she deleted from every device she owned. Except I hadn't gotten them from her devices. I got them from his. Third. A short contract. Single page. Legal. And signed. Her signature. Her handwriting. I watched her pupils dart across it like she could blink the ink away. She made a sound small, like a faucet dripping in an empty house. Not a gasp. Just failure escaping her throat. Her lover leaned over her shoulder like a nosy neighbor reading someone else's bad news. But when his eyes hit the paragraph with my name under sole trustee with irrevocable discretion over marital assets, his eyebrows drew together like a man trying to solve a math problem under duress. He muttered, "Wait, what is this?" She didn't answer. She just kept flipping. Vacation photos from 2 years ago, Catalina Island. A dinner she barely remembered because she spent most of it texting under the table. That's when I got her to sign the amendment. I'd called it a streamlined estate revision. She didn't even ask questions. She never did when I played the fool. "Is this a joke?" the boss asked, louder now. I stepped forward. Not rushed, not angry, just present. "You look tense," I said to him, smiling like a doctor about to deliver bad news. He didn't like that. "You can't just," he began, and that's when I moved. 2 steps, hand out. My grip found his collar before his sentence found a subject. His back hit the wall. A wine painting rattled above his head. He choked loud, then quiet. My mouth was next to his ear. "You think your firm knows who you're with tonight?" I whispered. "Or how many policy violations you've racked up in the last week alone?" His eyes widened. Sweat beaded. I let go. He stumbled like a freshman on cheap tequila. Didn't say a word after that. "My wife," My soon-to-be ex stood still, pages in hand, face drained, mouth barely forming words. What is this?" she finally croaked. "This," I said. "This is the part where you start rereading things you should have understood the first time." She blinked. I nodded to the paper with her signature. "You remember when I asked if you wanted to protect your assets in case I died suddenly? You said you trusted me to handle it. And I did. Just not the way she expected. Because that's the problem with people who play games. They never think someone else might already know the rules." You could hear the silence growing teeth. She stood there, clutching the papers like they might rewrite themselves if she held them long enough. He was still breathing hard from the wall, trying to fix his collar like that might repair his dignity. I didn't speak. Not yet. Let them sweat. Let the moment stretch long enough for him to taste what it felt like to be uncertain. Then I walked toward him again. Not fast. Not slow. Just steady. He tensed like I was holding a weapon. "Don't worry," I said. "I'm not violent." That was only partially true. But I was precise. He opened his mouth, probably to bluff his way back into control, but I grabbed him before the syllables had a chance to finish forming. Collar again. One hand. Lifted him just enough so his heels barely kissed the floor. This wasn't rage. This wasn't an outburst. This was a demonstration. I pinned him gently enough to avoid bruising, firmly enough to make a point, against the same wall where my daughter's childhood growth chart was faintly etched in pencil. My voice didn't rise above a whisper. "You think your firm knows who you're with tonight?" I said, breathing calm. "Or that you're at your subordinate's home, during business hours, in a domestic dispute, undocumented, unsanctioned, and very much against their code of conduct?" He squirmed, but not with strength. With the realization that I'd already done the math. Already filed the papers. Already timed the clock. I could smell his fear. Not sweat. Fear. The kind that starts in your gut and trickles up your spine when you realize someone's 10 steps ahead and still walking. I let him go. He stumbled backward, caught himself on the arm of the couch, then tried to make himself look taller again. Classic dominance move. Useless. He didn't say a word. I turned to her. She was trembling. Not visibly, but I could see the way she gripped the papers. Knuckles white, like they were the only solid thing left. "You brought a man into my home," I said, thinking I'd just roll over, like I haven't been watching, like I haven't been preparing. Still, I didn't raise my voice. Loud men lose power. Quiet men build it. "I didn't cheat," she muttered reflexively, like a child caught with chocolate on her face insisting she didn't eat the bar. I tilted my head. "No? So how many work retreats did you and Jason here take this year? 4? 5? She looked at him, then me. She didn't know how much I knew, and that was the point. "Those charges on our account," I continued. "Spa hotels. Room service for 2. Business dinners that somehow show up twice. You really thought I wouldn't notice the same receipt scanned and emailed under different expense categories?" He paled. She blinked. I walked toward the front door, opened it, held it. "You're a guest," I said to him without turning. "I expect you to act like one. Or leave." He didn't move. I looked over my shoulder. "Now." He walked out wordless, defeated. She didn't follow him. For the first time in years, she wasn't in control of the conversation. For the first time ever, she saw me not as the boring, predictable husband who made coffee at 7:12 every morning and folded laundry by color, but as someone dangerous. Someone who had waited, watched, documented, and built a plan so quiet, so boring, that she never once imagined it could explode. But it had just begun. The sound of the new deadbolt sliding into place was therapeutic. I didn't do it in a hurry. I wasn't angry. I was deliberate. Same as always. Screwdriver in hand, coffee on the porch rail, watching the sun creep over the fence line like it didn't care my marriage had just imploded. And honestly, didn't. Neither did the birds, or the air, or the neighbor walking his dog across the street who waved like it was any other Tuesday. She hadn't come back the night before. I assume she stayed with him wherever alpha males go when they're licking wounds and pretending they're still in charge. But I wasn't interested in where she was. I was interested in where she wasn't. And that was here, in my house. The locks were done by 9. By 10, her name was scrubbed from the power, gas, water, and internet. It's remarkable how fast utility companies respond when you have every document in hand, notarized, digitized, and dated weeks in advance. At 11, the real treat arrived, a tow truck. Her SUV had been parked on the curb like a territorial claim. I filed the lien notice 30 days ago under a dormant title clause she never read. Because the car wasn't hers. Not legally. Not anymore. I transferred it to my name as temporary use during her last vacation. One signature on a digital form, one notarized envelope, and boom, my property. The driver looked confused at first. You sure this is the one? License plate ends in 317, I said, pointing. That's the one. Hooked, lifted, gone. By lunch, she was on the phone with the bank. I know because they called me right after. Mr. Kessler, we're confirming a joint account freeze per your submitted documents? Yes. Just confirming. You transferred ownership of all joint assets into a private spousal trust? Correct. And the trust is solely managed by you? Yes. Pause. Understood. We'll mark her access as revoked. Click. It wasn't hard. People think banks are these fortresses of fairness. They're not. They're fortresses of procedure. And I had procedure down to a science. By the time her lawyer called, an oily voice with fake concern, everything had already shifted. Mr. Kessler, he started. We're hoping to come to a collaborative discussion about division of assets. There are no assets to divide, I said. Well, your wife. Your client. I corrected him. Pause. Legal tone adjusting. Your former spouse has concerns about account accessibility and property disputes. She can bring them to trust court, I said, sipping coffee. That'll take about 6 to 9 months. Another pause. We'll be in touch. Click. What she didn't realize was that she'd left the game board assuming I'd wait for her to come back and negotiate. But I wasn't waiting. I hadn't been for months. While she'd been playing fantasy romance with her boss, I'd been rewriting the rules. Every account, every title, every tiny clause that could be twisted in my favor had been pulled like a thread from a suit she didn't know was unraveling. She didn't know that I'd found the message, the real one, the one she sent from her work iPad, assuming it wasn't synced. He's dull, predictable, safe. I can come back to him if this fizzles. I had it printed, framed it even, hung it behind a painting in my office. Because safe doesn't mean stupid. Predictable doesn't mean unaware. And she just stepped off a cliff thinking she was walking on marble. By dusk, I made dinner. 1 plate, 1 chair, and the doorbell didn't ring. Not that night. Not the next. Because now she was waiting, and she had no idea how far behind she already was. He started ghosting her the very next day. Not suddenly, just in subtle, cowardly increments. Messages took longer to arrive. Phone calls went straight to voicemail. The breakfast selfies disappeared from her social feed like someone had hit the delete button on their affair's highlight reel. By Friday, he stopped tagging her in their team lunches. By Sunday, he'd unfollowed her entirely. And by Monday morning, he was no longer replying to her at all. That's the thing about alpha types. They only act bold when the audience is clapping. The second the spotlight shifts and shadows start crawling in from the corners, they panic. They recede. They deflect. They run. But I wasn't finished with him yet. You see, I had a folder. A very quiet, very private folder. It sat in a fireproof box under my study desk, next to my father's cufflinks and a coin from my first deployment. It was labeled Inventory A. Nothing suspicious. But inside was strategy. Photos. Printed. Dated. Him walking into my home, into my garage, into my living room. Different outfits. Different days. Some of them time-stamped during office hours, which I found interesting considering his firm's strict policy on external engagements during billable time. I even had the one where he leaned over to kiss her on my porch. She thought the Nest camera was just for show. I disabled the motion alerts, not the recording. But that wasn't the best part. The best part was a typed HR complaint. 6 pages. Professionally written, structured, outlined, and damning. Details about their relationship, locations, expenditures, conflicts of interest, all framed through the lens of how it could expose his firm to liability. And signed. For months it sat waiting. Until last Thursday. That's when a sleek black envelope showed up on the desk of his company's general counsel. No return address. Just a courier label and the initials JK on the tag. The complaint was signed. The photos attached. And one final line had been added at the bottom. If this is ignored, I'll forward to your board. Then to the press. No bluff. Just consequences. 2 days later. A whisper leaked from someone in HR to someone in compliance. By the weekend, a quiet internal review had begun. And by Monday, he was called into a closed-door meeting with 3 people who don't smile very often. She didn't know. Not yet. But she felt it. She called him 6 times that day. No answer. Texted. No response. Finally, she showed up at his apartment. He didn't open the door. She stood there for 45 minutes. Left. Came back. Left again. Crying, I assume. Later that night, she emailed him a long, rambling apology. He replied with a single line, "I need to focus on my career right now." And just like that, her escape plan got legs and sprinted in the opposite direction. Because here's the part she never calculated. Backup plans don't work when they're built on borrowed confidence. She thought he was a parachute. He was just a brick wrapped in flattery. The firm didn't fire him, not right away. No, they started with the polite strategy. Isolate, investigate, and observe. They reassigned his accounts, paused his promotion, scheduled a performance alignment review, and quietly, they began asking around, "Who is John Kessler?" Because the name on the envelope, the one who sent that neatly stacked package, wasn't some jilted husband. It was someone who knew exactly how corporate compliance worked, how reputation collapses faster than relationships, and how leverage isn't loud, it's prepared. She had no idea that while she was playing emotional poker, I was laying tripwires under every step they took together. And now, she could hear them snapping, one by one. She had always been quick with lawyers, faster than she ever was with apologies. Her divorce attorney came highly recommended, of course. One of those high-rise types with the polished voice and 10-second pauses meant to sound strategic. She probably thought hiring him would signal to me that she wasn't messing around. But I wasn't the one who needed the warning. The strategy call was scheduled for Monday at 3 p.m. Her attorney sent over a list of proposed discussion points, which was just a sanitized way of saying, "Give us everything and we'll pretend you agreed to it. Property division, spousal support, asset reallocation, full buffet." They expected my reply to come through a lawyer too. Instead, I sent an email. No greeting, no sign-off, just one line in the body. The prenuptial was amended via post-nuptial contract. Enclosed are the notarized documents, dated and witnessed, and below that, a single PDF file, 43 pages, signed, stamped, legal. I don't know how long it took her to open it, but I do know her lawyer replied 4 minutes later with a question that must have hit like a punch to the stomach. "Did you actually sign this?" She didn't respond to him for over an hour. She probably sat there rereading the contract, her eyes crawling across every line like they were lies made real by ink. But they weren't lies. They were hers. 2 years ago, during a vacation to Sedona, we had a talk. She'd grown distant, distracted, and emotionally slippery. I told her I wanted to make sure we were secure. Financially. Estate simplification, I called it. In case anything ever happened to me. She smiled over her glass of wine and said, "I trust you. You always take care of everything." And then she signed. I even took a photo of her doing it. Not for legal reasons, just for memory. I had a notary on standby at the hotel. She thought it was romantic. Said it reminded her of when we first got married, when we still cared about our future. Turns out I did, just in a different way than she expected. The postnuptial agreement revoked the prenup, replaced it entirely, transferred all jointly owned property, accounts, and investments into a trust under my sole direction. It outlined 0 spousal support in the event of infidelity. And it defined infidelity very broadly. I gave her the sunset, the spa weekend, the little hike where she posed in front of a rock formation like a lifestyle influencer. She gave me everything else. Now, as her attorney scrambled to grasp how his confident client had just detonated her own leverage, she was left staring at her own signature. It wasn't a forgery. It wasn't coerced. It was hers. The date was there. The witness was real. The language airtight. And suddenly, the $1,000,000 smirk she wore when she first declared, "I want a divorce," didn't seem like such a smart investment. I knew what she'd try next. It was misleading. I didn't read it thoroughly. He tricked me. But here's the thing about contracts signed in tranquility. They hold stronger in court than one signed under duress. Especially when the signer is sipping Merlot and laughing in the background of a time-stamped video. Her attorney tried to push back. He floated words like coercion and unconscionable. I let him, because that's what amateurs do when they're outplayed. They throw words around like they can rewrite time. But she'd already written her fate in ballpoint pen. She just hadn't realized she was the ghostwriter of her own undoing. And as her lawyer scrambled to salvage a case built on delusion, I made lunch. Grilled cheese. Tomato soup. Simple. Because there's something poetic about watching someone burn a mansion they never owned while you enjoy a quiet meal in the house they thought was theirs. It started with the glances. Not the full-body turns or the obvious stares. Just the kind of tight-lipped nods and half-tilted heads people reserve for office gossip that's too hot to touch directly. The networking event was supposed to be her launch pad. Mid-year promotions were around the corner, and her name had been floated at the last 2 board meetings as a strong candidate for external liaison. But tonight she was radioactive. She walked into the downtown hotel conference suite wearing her favorite slate gray blazer, heels sharp enough to pass as weapons, and that practice smile she used to weaponize at home whenever I asked how her day went and she wanted me to shut up before she had to lie. There was a drink in her hand within 3 minutes. She laughed too loudly at something someone in HR said, then made a beeline for the CFO, her fallback plan if the VP track fell through. But he looked over her shoulder when she greeted him, and didn't look back. It took her another 30 minutes to realize the seating chart had shifted. She was still listed in the digital RSVP, but no longer marked as key speaker in the app's agenda section. Small thing, easy to miss, but she saw it. Then the whispers started. Low, surgical. A woman from accounting took one glance at her, then leaned in close to her partner and said something behind a manicured hand. The man didn't react, but he did move his wine glass slightly to the left, away from her. By the time she reached the networking circle where the director of regional ops usually made jokes and dropped hints about who was climbing the ladder fastest, she found only polite nods and rapidly vanishing eye contact. No one said a word about her promotion. No one congratulated her, because they already knew. The leak had been slow and deliberate. An anonymous email sent to the internal ethics mailbox. Copies of the HR complaint, photos of her boss entering our home during hours listed on his timesheet, expense reports showing duplicate entries for meals at hotels that didn't match the official trip logs. It didn't take long before investigation became the word behind every closed door on her floor. And her boss? Gone. On immediate family leave. Per the vague memo sent out to the company the day before. No explanation. No goodbye email. Just absence. His calendar disappeared from the system. His nameplate was gone. And everyone knew exactly why. She tried to recover. Laughed it off. Said something about jealous exes and toxic dynamics. But people don't care about the context. They care about the fallout. And the fallout was walking around the room in heels, wondering why every conversation dried up the moment she joined in. Then came the final blow. As she hovered near the catering table, picking at a cracker she wasn't going to eat, a junior analyst she'd once snapped at for mislabeling a spreadsheet passed by, wine in hand. He paused just long enough to lean in and say, "You really should have stayed with the quiet one." No sarcasm, no bite, just truth, delivered like a condolence. She left 10 minutes later, alone. No goodbyes, no contact cards, no business handshake at the door. Outside, she waited for her car, arms folded, staring at the valet loop like it owed her something. But all it gave her was time to think. And for the first time in a very long time, she did. Because it wasn't just her marriage unraveling now. It was her image, her carefully constructed professional persona. The one she used to build power, influence, and insulation was fraying at the edges. Not in court, not in the tabloids, but in the one place that had always mattered more to her than home. The office. And this time, no one was holding the door open. The envelope arrived on a Thursday. She recognized the letterhead immediately, my lawyer's firm. Crisp, understated, brutal. The kind of logo that didn't scream. It didn't need to. It was the legal equivalent of a cold handshake and a closed door. She opened it at her desk, under the faint hum of fluorescent lights in the office she used to strut through. Her hands were still trembling from the networking disaster a week earlier. Her email inbox had been unusually quiet. Meetings mysteriously rescheduled. One-on-ones postponed indefinitely. She had already started packing up small items. Framed photos, a branded pen set, a mug that read Girl Boss now chipped. And then the letter hit her like a steel beam. The marital home, our home, had been sold. Not listed. Not negotiated. Sold. The proceeds? Not to her. Not even to me. They had been transferred into a charitable foundation I had registered months earlier. The Kessler Wellness Foundation. She'd never heard of it, but she had signed it. 2 years ago, on our anniversary. I remember the moment. We were sitting on the porch, and I handed her a stack of forms. Told her it was part of my end-of-life planning. Something to keep things simple if anything ever happened. She waved her hand, laughed. You and your paperwork. Then signed every page without reading a word. One of those pages was a power of attorney directive related to future real estate disbursement, granting me full authority in the event of dissolution or incapacitation. It was legal. It was binding. It was airtight. She remembered none of it now. Of course she didn't. But her signature didn't forget. The letter laid it out clearly. The funds from the home sale had been deposited into a 501(c)(3) nonprofit trust, dedicated to mental health resources for veterans and caretakers. The board of directors consisted of myself, 2 retired officers, and a social worker. None of them knew her name. At the bottom of the page was a mission statement. In memory of Eleanor Kessler, who believed dignity isn't given, it's protected. My mother. She hated my mother. Always said she was cold, too reserved, too formal. Said she held back love like it was a commodity. But the truth is, my mother just didn't perform love the way my wife needed it. And now her name was gone. From the deed. From the bank account. From the foundation charter. From the future. She tried calling the firm. The paralegal transferred her to voicemail. She tried her attorney. He called back finally and said flatly, "You did sign it. Multiple times." "I didn't know," she whispered. "That's not a defense," he replied. She didn't cry. She wasn't the crying type. She just sat there, papers in hand, realizing something deeper than betrayal had occurred. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't even punishment. This was erasure. She'd built her next chapter assuming she could extract value from the last. That she'd walk away with half the house, a settlement, maybe even a quiet little win in court if she played the sympathy card right. Instead, she was watching the ground shift beneath her. Not just financially, existentially. I hadn't just removed her from my life. I had removed her from the narrative entirely. Every exit she thought she had planned, closed. Every asset she assumed was shared, claimed. Every lever she thought she could pull, rusted in place, disconnected, non-functional. And the worst part? She'd helped build the machine that shut her out. One signature at a time. She had wanted freedom. What she got was emptiness. She didn't start with, "I'm sorry." She started with, "Can we meet?" It was a voicemail. Stiff, uneven. Like her throat hadn't decided whether it wanted to cry or command. There was no apology in her tone. Just exhaustion. A voice stripped of its choreography. For once, she didn't rehearse. She pleaded. I waited a day. Then I called back. "We can meet," I said. Same place we renewed our vows. A long pause on the other end. "I'll be there," she whispered. The courtyard hadn't changed much in 15 years. The ivy still curled over the wrought iron gate. The same wooden bench leaned under the old maple tree, worn and cracked, just like the promises exchanged nearby. The little stone fountain still made that soft splashing noise, the one she used to call God's clock. I got there 10 minutes early. I knew she would be late. She always was when she didn't want to face something. That hadn't changed. But I wasn't in a hurry. I'd already waited enough. When she finally stepped through the gate, she looked smaller somehow. Like the scaffolding of vanity and ambition had finally been peeled away. No heels, no makeup, just her. And the silence. She paused when she saw me. Same suit I wore on our second wedding day. The one she picked out. She used to say it made me look like a man with answers. Now, I suppose I did. She sat beside me without a word. Hands trembling in her lap. Not from cold, just from knowing. "Why?" she asked finally, voice hoarse. "Why would you do all of this?" I didn't answer at first. I reached into my coat and pulled out the envelope. The same one I gave her the night she walked in with him. Same weight, same color. But this one was empty. She stared at it like it might explode. Slowly, she reached out and took it. Her eyes met mine. "It's empty," she said, blinking. "No," I said. "It's just done." She shook her head, lips parting like she had more questions. More spin, more justifications lined up like dominoes. But they didn't come. Nothing came. "You filled it yourself," I said calmly. "I just mailed it." Her mouth moved but no sound followed. "You made every choice. I continued. Every lie, every document you didn't read, every night you thought I was too boring to notice. I didn't change. I didn't react. I just watched. And when the picture was complete, I framed it. And I sent it where it belonged. She looked down at her hands. No wedding ring. Just skin, pale, bare, unanchored. I didn't think you'd... She trailed off. No, I said. You didn't think. That was the problem. She blinked hard. This wasn't revenge, I said. Revenge is messy. Revenge is emotional. I'm not emotional anymore. The fountain behind us kept trickling. She finally asked the one thing I knew would come. Is there anything left? I let the question hang there. Not because I was being cruel, but because truth takes time to land in people like her. I stood. No, I said. Not for you. She didn't follow me as I left. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just sat on that bench, holding the empty envelope like it might start talking. But it wouldn't. It had said everything it needed to say. And now, it was silent, just like me. She rose slowly from the bench like the weight of the envelope had multiplied. The air had gone still, thick, like the courtyard itself didn't want to witness what came next. Her shoes scraped softly against the stone as she turned to leave, head down, shoulders no longer proud but punished. And that's when he appeared. I saw him before she did, standing just outside the gate, his shirt untucked, tie gone, eyes sunken like he hadn't slept in days. His hair was still wet, but not from a shower, rain maybe, or sweat, or panic. Her ex-boss, her backup plan, her co-conspirator in delusion. He looked smaller than I remembered. That smug, polished alpha energy he carried when he strutted into my home like he was claiming it, gone. In its place, desperation barely concealed under cologne. He opened his mouth like he had something rehearsed. But nothing came, not even air. She froze when she saw him. Her lips twitched like she might speak, but she didn't. They just stood there, facing each other, neither one stepping forward, neither one owning anything anymore. I walked past them, calm, steady, didn't look at her, didn't need to. She'd already read every chapter. But when I reached him, I stopped. He flinched like I might hit him. I didn't. I leaned in just close enough for only him to hear. You entered my house without invitation, I whispered. Now let me show you the cost. His eyes darted, panic blooming behind them. He wanted to ask what I meant, but I was already walking again. I didn't need to explain. The cost was already paid. The compliance board at his firm had launched a full-scale investigation. His clearance had been revoked, his bonuses frozen, and his name had been removed from the internal company directory. A quiet erasure. I knew people in his industry, quiet people, good listeners. One of them owed me a favor. Another didn't like him to begin with. And now, let's just say he'd be on the bench for a long time. Not fired. That would have given him too clean an ending. No, suspended. A limbo. A career purgatory that kept him from moving forward but didn't set him free. Because a ruined man can rebuild. But a questioned man? A man suspected? He rots slowly. He stumbles back one step, two. His face pale. Shoulders caved in like he'd just realized the storm had only been quiet because it was above him the whole time. I didn't look back again. I walked out of the courtyard into sunlight. Quiet. Composed. No shouting. No gloating. No final scene with thrown glasses or courtroom drama. Just two people behind me watching. One holding an envelope that was never really empty. The other holding his breath, because he knew whatever I whispered wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And me? I just walked away. Not because I won, but because I finished. And that quiet, complete, and undeniable was the final move.